Hello everyone, my name is Mary Kajoka and this is our Excel Basics video number 8 for our class. It is my hope that your day is going well. It's another great day that we get to continue learning Excel. In our past lessons, we have learned what is a proper dataset and the importance of having a proper dataset. We have learned that we use raw data stored in Excel for calculation and data analysis, and we convert that into useful information that helps us make informed decisions based on the summarized data. In our Excel Basics video number 7, we learned how to create pivot tables and slices. In this video, we will continue learning and create more standard pivot tables and slices. We will use the grouping feature in the standard pivot table to group the date field. We will filter the pivot table using a slicer, and we will connect the slicer to multiple pivot tables. We will also learn how to calculate using the summarized values by and show values as in our pivot tables, and we will see how to analyze data that is in one column. In our Excel Basics video number 7, we learned how to summarize values by sum, count, and average functions. There are 11 available functions in a pivot table that we can use to summarize values by, and I have listed them here, and here is a screenshot of the value field settings dialog box, and we saw this from our last video number 7. As I said, in this video, we'll also do calculations in our standard pivot table using the show values as. The show values as can be done also in the value field settings dialog box. You can also right click on your values in the pivot table, and from the drop down menu you select the show values as, and as you can see in this picture right here, and we will learn more of this in this video. This is a list of show values as calculation that we will do in this video. Below here is a list of all show value as calculations options and what each of these calculations does. Now let's go to our single column survey data pivot table worksheet to start working on our calculations for this video. An example of a single column data would be data from a survey. In this example, we have data that we will use for our calculation. We know that distraction is one of the leading causes of road accidents, and distraction driving can be caused by using a phone. And so our survey question here is, drivers should not be allowed to talk on a handheld cell phone while driving. Our goal in this example is to calculate the count of the driver's response, and then we will show values as percentage column total, that is percentage total of the driver's response. Now this survey data is already converted to an Excel table, which we all know how to convert a table to an Excel table, or how to convert a proper data set to an Excel table and to name that table. Now let's create our first standard pivot table in this video. And just to refresh our memory, to insert or create a pivot table, you will go to your Insert ribbon tab, and on the Tables group, you would select the pivot table, click on that arrow, and then our data is coming from table range. You already know that I love using keyboard shortcuts, and if you are like me, then you will use the keyboard shortcut to create a pivot table for this. Now let's use our keyboard shortcut to do that. Alt-N-V-T. We have the dialog box right there, pivot table from table or range dialog box. Our table range, which is the table or Excel table that we have right here. We are inserting our pivot table in this same worksheet. So we already know we need to select existing worksheet and then provide the location. And we will insert our pivot table right there in cell D7, and then we'll click OK. We are not adding this data to the data model, so click OK. We have only one field here, but this is a single column survey data, and we have one field right here. We'll drag this field to the rows and to the values. So another thing that you can do, instead of dragging the field to the fields area right here. You can click on it, and if it doesn't go to the area that you would like it to go, then you can drag it to put it in the area that you would like it to be, since we already know that this is a pivot table. Now we dragged that one time to the rows area. We need to drag this field again to the values area and drag it a second time to the values area, since we are doing two calculations, which is our goal on this example. So now you do remember how to open the value field settings, and I'll refresh your memory on how to do that. On the values area on this calculated field, if you click on that arrow, the drop-down menu appears and you can select value field settings. And from here, we can do our settings for the pivot table. We can either summarize values by, or we can show values as. And we can also do the number format. I will cancel that. Another way to open the value field settings is to make sure that you are in any of the calculated values or fields in your pivot table. And then you go to the pivot table analyze ribbon tab. On the active field, click on the field settings button, and that again opens for you the value field settings dialog box, and you can do your settings right there. I will cancel that. The third way to open the value field settings, as we covered this in video number 7, but I would like us to refresh our memory, is to double click on this column header of the calculated field, and I will double click on that. And once I do that, we see that we open the value field settings. The other way to do that is to click any of the calculated values on your pivot table. You right click on that, and then you open the value field settings. You click on that button to open it, and now we opened the value field settings. So if you would like to change our column headers, we can do the custom name right there. If we would like to change our calculations, we can do that right there. So we would like to change our calculation here to show values as. We are in the second calculation right there. So I can select show values as, and right now we see there is no calculation. But if we click on that arrow, you can see we have different options of calculations that we can select from. So that's one way to show values as. I will cancel that. Let's start with this first column right here, count of drivers response. We don't need to make any changes to this. This is counting the driver's response, and we also don't need to do any number formatting on this. Now on this second column right here that shows count of drivers response to, we need to make changes to this. We can make changes to this by opening the value field settings or by right clicking. And once we right click, we select show values as, and we want to select percentage of column total. So if you click on that, now that changes to percentage of column total. I'm gonna do Control Z, and I will open the value field settings, and we will change this from the value field settings dialog box. So I'm clicking on the field header right there. I'll double click on it, open that. I would like to change this, and I'd also like to change the show values as. We're clicking on that arrow, and we're selecting percentage of column total. And then right here, we're changing that, and we will name this percentage of total response. So we named that. We changed the show values as to show as percentage of column total. We don't need to do any number format on this. So what I will do next, I will click OK. And once I do that, we can see now that has changed to percentage of total response. This is what we named our field here. And we can see now it is percentage of the total column right there. So this is 14% or 14.93% of the total. This is 2.93% of our total right there. This is 80.67% of our total. And this is 1.47% of our total. And we can see this is somewhat agree, somewhat disagree. And we see the strongly agree is the highest at 80.67%. Strongly disagree is the lowest at 1.47%. And it all adds up to 100%. And on our pivot table fields, we also see this also changed to percentage of total response. We changed the name. And if I expand that so you can see everything, you can see this is the same name that we have as our column header for this field. And you can see we used just one column and we analyzed our data right there. So that's the way you would analyze data using a single column. I would like to show you one more thing here before we go to our next example. Sometimes when you click inside your pivot table, you do not want to see the pivot table fields task pane here. So if it's in your way, one thing that you can do, once you see that 4 arrow, you click on it and you can drag it and move it to where it's not in your way. Sometimes you really don't want to see it entirely. And if you don't want to see it entirely for some reason, you can do that. So you will go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab on your ribbon. And then on the Show group, you would click on the Field List button. This is a show and hide. So if you click on it, it hides the pivot table fields task pane. If for some reason you're like, hey, I want to make some changes to my standard pivot table and I want to see my pivot table fields task pane, you can do that. You just go back to the field list button and you click on it. And again, your pivot table fields task pane shows right there. This is a show or hide button. It's in the show group in the Pivot Table Analyze ribbon tab. So now let's go to our next example on this workbook, and it's the sales data worksheet. So click on the sales data worksheet. On this example, our goal is to use this sales data and create the pivot tables in the next two worksheets, which is SVA pivot table and SV pivot table worksheets. The instructions are provided on top of each of the worksheets. Now let's look at this data before we create the pivot table. So I'm clicking on any one cell in my data set right there, and I'm using my control down arrow as we would like to see how big or how huge is our data. And we can see we have about 73,000 rows in our data. 73,180 or 73,100 and something, since if I go back at the top, the first two rows don't have any of our data. So it's about 73,178 or 77 rows. So we are using this data here, and we will analyze our data with the pivot tables, and we'll also create a slicer and connect that with our pivot tables to analyze our data. The first pivot table that we will create using this data will use the calculation for show values as, and we will insert our standard pivot table in this worksheet here that says SVA, which is show values as pivot table. And our instruction says that we are inserting our pivot table in the new worksheets. So let's first create our pivot table, and we will insert it in our new worksheet where we will read the instructions as we continue to work on our pivot table. So our keyboard, Alt-N-V-T. We will not click OK because that by default will open for us a new worksheet. But we already have a worksheet that has instructions. So what we will do, we will click on existing worksheet instead of doing new worksheet. If you already don't have the SVAPT worksheet created, we would have selected new worksheet. But because we already have this worksheet here, and in fact, let me cancel that first. Let me go to this SVA PT worksheet, which is show values as. We already have this worksheet right here. So we are placing our pivot table in this worksheet. If you want to place your pivot table in a new worksheet, then it will be a new worksheet without these instructions. But to be clear, we will select existing worksheet because we already have this new worksheet created and it has our instructions on what we need to do for our pivot table or what calculations we need to show on our pivot table. So I'll go back to the sales data, and again, my keyboard shortcut, Alt-N-V-T, and instead of selecting the new worksheet, I will select existing worksheet because we already have a worksheet created here. Again, if you didn't have a worksheet created, by default, we'll just do new worksheet and create a new worksheet where we will place our pivot table. But again, we already have our worksheet created. So I will select existing worksheet, and now I will go to show values as pivot table worksheet. And as I do that, you see the pivot table from table orange dialog box moved with me here. So I will click on cell A10 and I will click OK. We are not adding this data to the data model. I will click OK. And now we have our pivot table placed in this worksheet. So what we are doing, the first thing that we need to do is to group daily dates into months and years using the pivot table automatic grouping feature. And to do that, we'll just drag our date field to the rows area. So I will click on that, drag it to the rows area, and once I do that, we see it automatically groups the date for us. We have the months, quarters, and years. And if I were to show you what's in the areas below, I will expand that so we can see properly. And I will bring it closer right there. So now from the date field, the pivot table automatically grouped for us using the grouping feature. And we saw this in our last video, number 7. So we have the year, we have the quarter, the month, and the date. But in the instructions here, we just want the months and the years. So what we will do, we will drag out the dates, or you can click on this box to uncheck the field that you don't want. So we don't want the quarters, so we will click to uncheck that box. And you can see on the rows area now we have the year and the date. And it's right here in our pivot table. So if you would like to expand our field, you just click on that and then you right click. You can either click on this plus symbol right there. That will expand just that one year, and you have to expand each of them individually. I'll do Control Z. The other thing that you can do is click on that year right there, the first cell that I am in my pivot table right there. Right click on it, and then as we saw from our last video, number 7, we select expand collapse, and then we will expand entire field. And that way, it will expand all the years for us. I will adjust my column width right there so I can see the entire field. So we don't want it as years date and we don't want it as month date. The first thing that I will do here, I will rename that, and this is year. So I'm just clicking on the column header right there for that field and just typing on it. Same thing here, clicking on it and typing on it. So we renamed that, and we can see it's renamed here also in our rows area. So the next step is add the sum of revenue for the monthly sales. So we need to get the revenue to the values area, and we can see now we have the sum of revenue. The third step is add show values as difference from calculation to the monthly report pivot table. This will be difference from previous. So what we will do, because we're still dealing with our monthly sales for the revenue, we will drag the revenue a second time. And on this second time, we will double click on the column header right here. And we will change our settings from here. So we are showing values as difference from, and I will click on that, and I'm gonna drag this a little bit down so we see the instructions. So we're doing difference from calculation, and this is difference from previous. So I will click on that arrow, and I will scroll down, and we have difference from, and we're doing difference from previous for the months. So I will go up there and scroll till I see previous, and then I will click previous. And also, I don't want to forget that I need to rename the column. So this column will be named difference in revenue from previous month. While I'm still here, I would like to do our number format. So I will click on the number format button right there. And I would like to format this as a number. I don't want any decimal, so I will remove any decimal places there. I want 1,000 separator, so I'm gonna use the comma for the 1,000 separator, and I will click OK. And right here, I will click OK. And we can see now that is difference in revenue from previous month. I will do changes on this column right here as well. So I will double click on that, and I will add the dollar symbol right there. I'm not changing the values right there. I'm just doing the number format. I'm doing number, no decimals. I'm checking that box for the 1,000 separator, and click OK, and click OK. And now that has been formatted as well. So we've done step 1, 2, and 3. So we need to do our step 4. We're still dragging revenue that time to the values area, as we would like to do a calculation showing values as percentage difference from previous month. So I will drag the revenue at that time, and now I will right click, and I will use this option right here, show values as percentage difference from, and our base field is months, just like we did for this other calculation right there. But our base item is not August. Our base item here will be previous. So we have months and previous, which is what our instruction says right there. And I will click OK. And we can see now that changed even our number format, but it didn't change the header right here or the field name right there. So we need to change that. And this is percentage change from previous month, or percentage difference from previous month. I will rename that. So we can see everything. So what I will do, I will have to wrap this text and wrap this text. So I'm selecting that and then going to my home tab, and on my alignment group, I'm clicking on the wrap text button, and click on this other one here and wrap the text as well. And now I will adjust the width again here. And I think I would like to make some changes right there. I can do it from my formula bar right there, add a space and enter. And now I think it looks good. That looks good as well. So I think it all looks good to me. So we need to do the last step on our example here, where we are doing our calculation to show values as running total of our monthly report of our monthly sales. So again, I'm inside any cell in my pivot table so I can show my pivot table fields, and I'm dragging revenue for the 4th time. It's right there. I will right click on any of the values in this column that I would like to change the values or to show the values as. I will right click on that, show values as, and I'm selecting running total. Click on that. And then the base field is months. We're doing a monthly report, so our base field will be the months. The calculation is running total, and I will click OK. And now we have our running total there. So another thing that I will do is to change the column header here or the field name here to running total. And I will also do number formatting for these values. So I will double click on my column header right there to open the value field settings. And I will change the custom name here to running total. I'll add the dollar symbol. And then I will do the number format right there. And I'm doing this as number, no decimals. And I don't want to show up. I should be at number, not currency. Number, no decimals. And I want to do 1,000 separator for the comma right there. And then I will click OK. And while I'm here, I will show you if I click show values as, we have the months here, which is our base field. And we have the running total, which we already changed our field here to running total. So I will click OK. And we can see now that has formatted our number, and we changed the field name right there. And we can see on our pivot table fields, as we changed our names, that changed here as well. The other thing that I would like to show you, if you don't like this style, you can change it from design, and I will do that. I will go to the design tab on my ribbon, and from the pivot table styles, I will click on that arrow, and I will see which one that I like. I will select this option right there, light green pivot style medium 14. And that looks good. So that's my pivot table. The last thing that I need to do, don't forget to do that, is to name our pivot table. We are naming this pivot table monthly report, since we are doing a monthly report for the sales in this pivot table. I'll go to the pivot table analyze tab on my ribbon, and on the pivot table group right there, I will rename this as monthly reports. And enter. So my pivot table is named. We have formatted our values. We have named the fields to reflect each calculation that we did on these fields. And we have done a style formatting to make it look pretty, or to make it show the design that you would like, or the design that you chose for your pivot table. So on this one, we grouped the daily dates into months and years using the grouping feature. We added the sum of revenue, which is that column right there. We did the show values as, which is difference in revenue from previous month. We did the percentage change, or the percentage difference from previous month. And we also did the running total of all of our sales. And if I scroll down so you can see the entire pivot table, it's showing the year, it's showing the months, and the calculations that we did. And one thing that I would like you to note, when you're doing the calculations for show values as, we are dragging the revenue, which is the field that we're doing the calculations on. We are dragging the revenue field 4 different times in the values area. So one of them is for sum. Second one, we change that to difference from. And then the third one, we do percentage change or percentage difference from. And then the fourth one, we changed it to running total. So on our next example, I will show you how to summarize values by. And in that example, we will create 2 pivot tables and a slicer, and we will connect the slicer with the 2 pivot tables. So let's go to our next example, which is SVPT worksheet. I'll first click on that so we can see the instructions. These are the instructions that we need to do in this worksheet. We're summarizing values by, a standard pivot table, and these are the steps that we will follow. So we'll go back to our sales data worksheet. This is the data that we are using. As we saw earlier in our goal here, we are creating pivot tables in the next 2 worksheets. So we already did in the first worksheet. Now we need to do it in the second worksheet where we are summarizing values by. So select in any cell in your data and insert a pivot table. Alt NVT. We are inserting our pivot table in an existing worksheet, which is Summarize Values Pivot Table or SV Pivot Table worksheet. So select existing worksheet and then click on the SVPT worksheet. We will place our standard pivot table in cell A8 and we will click OK. So our goal here is to use our sales data and create a standard pivot table in this worksheet. So the first thing that we're doing is to create a regional and product category, total, and average revenue report. We'll add number formatting to that. We already set our default to show in tabular layout. We'll not forget to name the pivot table, and we have the name that we are naming the pivot table right there. And if you like, you will change the style. So let's start by bringing the fields to the fields area. So we're getting the region, place the region in the rows area, and then we're getting the product. This is not a cross tabulated pivot table, so placing the product in the rows area. And then we're getting the total revenue. We get our revenue to the values area. And we also need the average revenue, so we drag revenue again to the values area. So we have 2 columns here of revenue. One is sum of revenue, and the other one we will change the settings to average, or we'll change our calculation to average. So I will double click on the field header or column header right there. I will change the name here, and this will be average revenue. We're changing that to summarize values by average. So we're changing that to average, our calculation. We'll do the number formatting while we're still here. We're doing number. We're not doing any decimals for this one. So I will do 0 decimals and I will do 1,000 separator. So I'll check that box and click OK. And then click OK. And now we have changed that, but I see our field name here didn't change correctly. So I'll go back and change that again. And now we'll click OK. And now that looks good. So we need to change this from sum of revenue. We will name this sum of rev. So I will double click on that because we also need to do the number formatting on this one. And I will change that to sum of rev. A space, put a dollar symbol. And then we're doing the number format. Number, no decimals, 1,000 separator for the comma. Click OK. We're not changing the calculation right there. We're leaving it as sum. So we click OK. And now we see that has been updated as well. So the next thing on our instructions here is to show in tabular layout. And as I said, we already changed our default to show our report in tabular layout. We need to name our pivot table. So I'm in the pivot table analyze ribbon tab. I'll go to the pivot table group and I will name this region report. The other thing that we need to do, if you don't like this style, you can change the style. So I will change that. I will go to design and I'm changing this to, let me see how it looks with that. I'm changing it to that color. So that looks good. So we're done with this first pivot table. We need to create a second pivot table, and we are creating a product revenue report that shows or summarizes values by sum, average, and count. So we'll go back to our sales data, which is our main data right there. And we'll insert a standard pivot table one more time, Alt NVT. We're placing it in an existing worksheet. We go back to SVPT worksheet, and we'll drag these to the side. And I'll place our pivot table in G8 and click OK. And on this one, we're doing product revenue. So we're dragging the product to the rows, and we need the sum, average, and the count of the revenue. So we're dragging revenue 1 time, 2 times, and 3rd time. So we'll come here now and we'll do the number formatting and change our calculation. The first one, we're keeping it as sum. I'll double click on the field header right there. We're keeping that as sum. We're doing number format, number, no decimals, and check that box for the 1000 comma separator and click OK. And I will change this to sum of rev and click OK. So that is done. Now the next field, double click that. We're changing that to average. We're renaming this to average of rev, dollar symbol right there, and we're doing our number format as well while you're here. Number, 0 decimals, comma for 1000 separator, and click OK. And click OK. So that is done. Now we do the 3rd one, which is the count, the number of transactions. So I'll double click on that. We're changing that to count, and this is number of transactions. And we do our number format while you're here. So that's number, 0 decimals, and we use 1000 separator for the comma. And I will click OK, and we'll click OK. And now that looks good. So now the next thing that I need to do is to add a style formatting for this one. I want one that matches with this one. So I will go to design, and I will change the style using the same style right there. And I need not to forget to name our pivot table. We're naming this product revenue. So go to pivot table analyze tab on my ribbon. On my pivot table group, I will name this product revenue. So we're done with the second step. That step that we need to do is to add a slicer to the region report. So I need to make sure that I click any cell inside the region report pivot table. And we are adding a slicer to this. I'm still on the pivot table analyze tab on my ribbon. On the filter group, I will insert a slicer, and we are inserting a year slicer. So we have the year right there, and I will click OK, and we have the year right there, and we see our year is showing fields that we don't need. No problem, we can hide that. So I will right click on our slicer and click on slicer settings, and then this box here, we need to check that box that says hide items with no data. We'll check that box. And then we need our name here to be just the year and not year date. And we can change the caption here as well to just years and not date on that. And then we'll click OK. And now we have hidden the fields that don't have any data, and we have changed the slicer name to years. Now I need to make sure that I'm coordinating all these 3 colors for the slicer and the pivot tables. So I'm going to the slicer styles, and I'm changing that to that style. Let me do another style, see if it works. Yep, that looks better. So I'm changing it to that style, and now I'm coordinating my colors for all that. Now on our 4th step, it says we connect our slicer to both pivot tables. So right now, this slicer is connected to only this pivot table. So if I click on the year to filter, it's filtering only this pivot table, which is our region report. Click on that, it's filtering only the region pivot table. So we need to connect this slicer with this pivot table and this pivot table. I will clear the filters. To do that, I will right click on the slicer one more time, and I will select report connections. And right here, we can see we have 3 different pivot tables. So that's why it's really important to name your tables, your pivot tables, your worksheets. That way, when you're connecting, like if you have to connect your slices, you know which one you need to select. So right now we see it's connected to the region report, which is in the SVPT, which is the summarized values by pivot table worksheet. And this one is also in the summarized values by pivot table worksheet. This one is the one that we created first. So this is the one that we need. So I will check that box to connect these 2 pivot tables. And then I will click OK. And now we want to confirm that our slicer is filtering both pivot tables. So I will filter on that here and I can see, yep, it's connected to both. Filter on another ear and I see it's changing. Filter on another ear is changing. Filter to have only 2 ears selected and it's changing as well. Clear the filter, it's changing as well. So we connected our slicer to these 2 pivot tables. If we had more pivot tables you saw from our report connections, if you had multiple pivot tables, you can use the same report connections dialog box and connect your slicer to however many pivot tables that you want to connect the slicer to. I will cancel that. And now we're done with all the steps that we needed to work on this worksheet. Our goal was to summarize or to use the sales data and create the standard pivot tables and then connect that with the ear slicer. And we have done that. We have learned that in this example right here. So in this video, our goal was to learn how to show values as and to summarize values by in a standard pivot table. And we have done exactly that. To help you do more practice on summarizing values by and show values as, I have included some homework files that you can work on in this workbook. And with that, we have come to the end of this video. I will see you in our next video where we get to continue learning and gaining more Excel skills. Thank you and see you in our next video. Bye-bye for now.